Hello and welcome to Storytime from Under the Rainbow. My name's Mrs. B and this is my lovely big story sack, and I'm going to tell you some stories from Under the Rainbow. Now today's story is about a little girl, a very special little girl. So special that her grandmother, who was very fond of her, made her a beautiful red cloak with a beautiful red velvet hood. And she wore this cloak everywhere that she went every day. And so she became known as Little Red Riding Hood. Now, are you sitting comfortably? Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Little Red Riding Hood. And she lived on the edge of the forest with her mother and her father. And her father was a woodcutter. And every day he went into the forest, deep into the forest, to chop down the trees for wood. And most days, Little Red Riding Hood went into her garden and played. She loved to especially play on her swing. Now one day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother called to her and said, "Little Red Riding Hood, I want you to go and visit grandmother in her cottage in the woods, as she's been very poorly." "I will," said Little Red Riding Hood. She knew exactly where the cottage was, as she'd been there lots of times along the path to visit her grandmother. "I want you to take a basket of freshly baked delicious cakes, and I want you to make her a cup of tea, and I want you to check that she's okay, as she's been in bed for a few days." "I will," said Little Red Riding Hood, who was very well behaved and polite. "And don't forget, Little Red Riding Hood, stay on the path that leads straight to grandmother's cottage and come home before dark." "I will," she said. And with that, she picked up the basket and she skipped off down the path towards grandma's cottage. Now, on her way, she saw lots of beautiful wild flowers growing at the side of the path. And she thought how nice it would be to pick some and collect them for her grandmother. There were bluebells and daisies and poppies, and so she put her basket down and she decided just to pick a few for her grandmother. Now, from behind a tree, someone had been spying her. I wonder if you know who that could be. Yes, you guessed it, the big bad wolf. Now the big bad wolf had been watching Little Red Riding Hood for some time, and he was wondering what was in that basket. Now he was a cunning wolf, and so he knew he'd got to be very careful and very clever if he was to eat whatever was in that basket. Good morning, little girl." Oh, you startled me. "Good morning," said Little Red Riding Hood. Where are you going so early on this fine morning?" said the wolf. I'm going to visit my grandmother in her cottage who lives in the woods. She's been very poorly." Said the wolf. "And what's in the basket?" "Oh, my mother has baked some delicious cakes, and I'm taking them to her to make her feel better." Said the wolf. "And I'm not really meant to talk to strangers," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Well, we've met now," said the wolf, "so we're not quite strangers." "I must be going," he said, "lots to do," and he disappeared off into the woods. And Little Red Riding Hood carried on picking the flowers for her grandmother. All the loveliest flowers were further away and always not within reach, so she had to stray a little bit further to pick the best ones. Now, meanwhile, the big bad wolf, who had lived in the woods many years, knew the quickest way to get to grandma's cottage. And so he ran there as swiftly as he could all the way. And when he got there, he knocked on the door. "Hello, grandmother, it is I, Little Red Riding Hood," he said in his best Little Red Riding Hood voice. "Oh, do come in," said grandmother. "I've not been feeling very well. Lift up the latch and come in, dear." So the big bad wolf lifted up the latch and in he went. And he went into grandma's bedroom. When she saw the wolf, she let out a scream. "Ah!" she said. "Ah!" said the wolf. And he chased her around the room and chased her out into the kitchen and chased her into the larder and scuttled her in and shut the door. And then he went back into the bedroom and he put on grandmother's nightcap. He was a master of disguise. And he put on grandma's glasses. And he got into grandma's bed. And he settled down and waited for Little Red Riding Hood to arrive. Now, Little Red Riding Hood had forgotten all about the time when she picked the flowers, and she suddenly thought, it must be time to be leaving. Oh, she gathered up all the flowers, she had an armful now, and picked up her basket of delicious cakes, and she quickly skipped off down the path towards Grandma's cottage. When she got there, she noticed the door was open. How strange, she thought, and she walked in, and then she went into Grandma's bedroom, and there was Grandma, and she sat down beside Grandma's bed. "Oh, grandmother, I've brought you some delicious cakes that mother has baked, and some flowers from the woods." Thank you," said the wolf in his best grandmother voice. "What big ears you have," she said. "All the better to hear you with, my dear," said the wolf. "And what big eyes you have, all the better to see you with, my dear," said the wolf. "And what strange hands you have," said Little Red Riding Hood. "All the better to hug you with, my dear," said the wolf. "And what big teeth you have, all the better to eat you with," said the wolf, and he leapt out of bed and he chased Red Riding Hood all around the bedroom. Red Riding Hood let out a scream, "Ah!" and just then through the door came the woodcutter. He saw the commotion. He lifted his axe and was just about to lift it down straight on top of the wolf's head when he leapt out of the window and was gone. Little Red Riding Hood ran up to the woodcutter, her father, and gave him a big hug and cried in his arms. "Oh, what about grandmother?" she said. "Never mind," said the woodcutter. "We'll go and look for her." And they looked round the house and they walked into the kitchen and into the larder and opened the door, and there was poor grandmother. Little Red Riding Hood and her father helped her back into bed. And they got the delicious cakes that her mother had sent her, and they made a lovely cup of tea, and they sat together and thought about how well things had turned out. And Little Red Riding Hood said that she wouldn't stray from the path in future. And the big bad wolf was never seen again. The end. Now, if you would like to tell the little story of the Little Red Riding Hood and you want to make some puppets, you could use these. You could make a little wolf, a little grandmother, or a little woodcutter. And if you can't quite remember the story, you could use some books to help you. and you could have some fun, as I have, and tell the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.